The Principles of Responsive Parenting, the updated version from 2021, written by Jay Milburn. I'm Jay Milburn. I wrote the Principles of Responsive Parenting because I wanted a framework that I could refer back to at all times that was based on my understanding of child development. And also a little bit of my personal experience and knowledge, but I would say the principles are mostly based on uh, scientific knowledge, research, and that is my purpose in introducing each one of these principles to you, is to show you what the purpose of each one is, where the scientific background came from, and why I've decided to include it as one of the principles. We're going to be doing the first principle, trust, this in this session. This is the trust session. But I'd just like to also preface this by saying that these principles were written as ideals. There is nobody, including myself, who is able to follow these principles at all times. They are written as sort of an aspiration, an inspiration, ideally what we are working for, what we are striving for, but nothing is perfect. No one's perfect. No relationship is perfect. Even though there's lots of principles, I could never ever include every situation, every circumstance, and everything when writing. So they are very general in nature, and I think that's really important to kind of recognize. Trust. Trust is at the heart of secure attachment and meaningful connections. It provides a foundation for children to feel motivated and inspired to expand their knowledge of the world and themselves. Responsive parenting is about encouraging feelings of trust within your child, trust in you, trust in the world around them, and most of all, trust in themselves. Responsive parents use the tools of empathy, unconditional love, and responsive care to achieve this secure bond and belief in one another. Responsive parents know that secure attachment is centered around trust. It is the byproduct of a relationship built on trust. A child needs to trust their parent in order to feel the safety of secure attachment. Also, a child who is securely attached will likely trust in themselves to accomplish goals and try new things because their primary attachment figure demonstrated that trust in them. Responsive parents accept that in order for a parent to trust their child to make choices and be their authentic selves, they also need to work on feeling that way about themselves. When responsive parents start to feel doubt in their abilities as a parent, they use reflection to understand and process those feelings of self doubt. The process of reflection can provide the inner child healing that is often helpful in developing trust in ourselves. So, this introduces a lot of the concepts that you're going to see throughout the principles, and that is one piece. The principles tie into each other, they are interwoven, they are not, individual silos of information, they impact each other. And I think that's really important. You'll often hear the same words being used that are principles. So they're not existing separately, they are existing together. So, where did this idea of trust come from? It's not just, trust is a pretty common word. We understand it, but why is it beneficial to child development? Why is it beneficial to our relationship with our children? And actually, Erik Erikson, who is a developmental psychologist, he developed a theory called the stages of psychosocial development. And it is one of the theories that we use in the field of child development. This graphic was brought to you by WellMind, but this concept is Erik Erikson's. So the stages of psychosocial development are trust versus mistrust, and that happens in infancy. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, that happens in toddlerhood. Initiative versus guilt, that happens as a preschooler. Industry versus inferiority, that's a grade schooler. Identity versus role confusion, that happens around teenage life. Intimacy versus isolation, that happens around the young adult stage. Generativity versus stagnation, that's the middle age adult. And integrity versus despair is the older adult. And what he says, these are conflicts. So you either kind of end up on either side of one. You either end up with a lot of trust or a lot of mistrust. You either feel a lot of autonomy or a lot of shame and doubt. So that's basically the idea. So we're going to talk about that first stage. And that first stage occurs in infancy. So it's believed that it starts at birth to 18 months. A lot of people would argue that it starts before then. And Erickson posed that responsiveness was the key to developing trust with an infant. Responding to feeding and comfort cues are the first experiences that build trust between child and parent. And for me, I found those pieces quite easy. My first child a little more difficult, but my second and third, like that really felt like the easy part. Because I didn't have to think too much about it. It was very much instinctual. And once I fell into that instinctual response instead of that cerebral response that I was in with the first child, uh, it felt very much like second nature. And I found the later stages a bit more difficult because they're a little less intuitive, I would say. So this starts in infancy, but it can be forgotten as children age. And that is, I think, the piece that I really want people to take away. Obviously, this starts in infancy. That foundation needs to be there or should be there, or, it's optimal for it to be there. Needs to be there is going a little too hard, probably because obviously there's lots of people who did not grow up with that and they are able to heal. But yeah, ideally and optimally, this trust is built in infancy, and that's the easiest time to build it. It's also you're going to get the most benefit out of it if it's in place in infancy. Now, what we do is this little infant who's so cute and lovely, and we want to just snuggle it and give it all this attention and love, and cries, becomes a toddler who doesn't listen to you saying no, and tells you they hate you. Then we become a teenager or a young adult who says they want a new mom, and and it becomes harder. It becomes harder to remember that we want to maintain that trust, or how important it is to maintain that trust, or how important, like, what we do to maintain that trust. And what we do is maintain a safe place for those feelings. And this is what we often miss. And so this parent's stance and this child's body language say a lot, but I also think that this is really common. And if we notice ourselves in this sort of aggressive stance and our child looks afraid, no matter what agenda we have, unless someone is in immediate danger, like physical danger, walk away for a minute, take a breath, because you're doing nothing but breaking trust there. And I say this as someone who has definitely had this stance before, and scared my children and upset them, and I'm sure I broke a little trust in that moment. This is the thing, and we all know this: trust can be broken at any time. You can trust somebody for 20, 25, 30 years and they can break your trust all of a sudden. And it's the same with our children. There's a little more uh, solidness in a relationship that begins at birth, mostly out of need, because we like on a on an instinctual and biological level, we almost like need each other. But at the same time, that trust can be broken. And just because you need someone emotionally doesn't mean that you trust them. And that is a very difficult place to be in as a child of a parent who maybe is emotionally immature or something. So uh, we need to remember that just because we put in those hours as an infant, it doesn't mean that like we're good. And they're just going to trust us forever. We need to continue to be trustworthy, to show them that we trust them, and to show them that we trust ourselves. So, trust is one of the foundational needs for an optimal relationship with your child. When your child can trust in your unconditional love, they feel a greater sense of confidence overall. This especially helps when they are trying to learn new things like walking and talking, and that's why that trust piece is so important. You become that secure base, that nest. So, if you think of a baby bird, how, first they just come out from under their mom's wing, and then maybe they come out and they have a little snack, and then maybe another time they're just kind of like looking over the side of the nest, and then one day they jump. But they only jump after those three sort of pieces are in place. They believe that their parent is there to catch them if they fall. They've seen that their parent trusts them and their parent's not afraid. And they've also seen that their parent trusts in themselves. They've seen their parent become confident and have trust in themselves. So even the little baby bird kind of has that same thing. So it's the same thing with walking and crawling and playing and learning and meeting new people. If you'll ever notice that if you go to a play group, your child, you may have a child who sits with you for a while, and then after a while they kind of like maybe they'll grab a little toy, but they come back to you. That is very typical. That is a sign of secure attachment, and that's a sign of secure base. And you're going to see this like huge range of it. You're going to see the child who barely leaves their parents' lap, or maybe they don't leave the lap and all they do is grab for the toy. um and then you're going to see ones who are almost never with the parent and just check in periodically, come in for the leg hug, come in for the smile or whatever, come in to show them something. It's the children that are fully avoiding their parents completely when they're out that you kind of wonder why, but you never know. You don't want to judge that either. But yeah, you will see a full range of what is typical and considered a secure attachment and still considered a trusting relationship. That's really dependent on temperament. Sorry for the cough. So, other ways that trust benefits a child is your feedback that you give them is seen as more helpful than critical. And I say that with a big caveat. And also, as a teen, I'm sure, I think my eldest is 11, but from what I understand and from what I've seen already, most of your suggestions may be seen as critical regardless. But I would say overall, children who have a trusting relationship with their parent receive feedback in a more neutral or helpful way than children who don't trust their parent. Then the feedback is either taken as, oh, is this an expectation, or maybe they're afraid not to live up to whatever the feedbacker is, or maybe they see it as critical. And only you would know that about your kid. Nextly, a child will likely confide in you even if they did something wrong. And that's probably the biggest one, I think, for a lot of us, is that I mean, I know as me as a parent, I don't know how you feel, but I assume that most other responsive parents, um, we want our children to feel comfortable to come to us if they have done anything. Like that we want our children to be comfortable to come to us no matter what. And we create that. We create that sense of safety and trust in these early years, and we continue to develop it over the years. Now, the other thing is, if you're having a hard time like conceptualizing this, think about what it's like to with your own parents. And if you are someone who does not feel like you can confide in your parent, or maybe inconsistently you can confide in them, like sometimes you confide in them and they're supportive, at other times they're like completely unsupportive, so it's really scary and you're not really sure. Um, like just think about your own relationships and who you feel like confiding in, and then try and be like that with your child. I find that to be a really helpful way to look at it. Also easier to co-regulate, even though it says cake, with a child that trusts you. So it's easier to co-regulate with a child that trusts you. uh Co-regulation is possible between any two people, but at the same time, I think it does require a level of trust, and trust makes co-regulation happen so much quicker. Um, like a fire, let's say, like a firefighter, they can co-regulate with in like an injured victim or something. That's part of their job. A nurse can, but they do that by developing trust and rapport really quickly. And without that sort of rapport, it's harder to co-regulate. So even in cases where co-regulation has to happen between strangers and really rapidly, it requires a bit of rapport and a bit of trust. And it does not happen when you are yelling at them or when you are scolding them or being critical of them or punishing them or any of those things. And I know that's really hard to hear, and it's hard to stop ourselves from doing those things, but it just, that's the truth. And you feel the same way, I'm sure. It lowers the risk of predators preying on your child. And I don't say that to scare you. I say that as a victim of childhood sexual assault. So, yeah, I don't talk a lot about why I do this work, but that's definitely part of it for me. And trust is incredibly important. A lot of predators will kind of suss out whether your kid is honest with you or not. And when they realize that a child has um, less of a trusting relationship with an adult, this is research based. It's not, it's nothing is 100%. But that's why I said lowers the risk. Because yeah, they'll prey on your child. Um, there's more likelihood of them preying on your child if they feel like the child's less likely to tell you, and they'll ask little like questions and stuff to figure that out. So, um, the more your child feels like they can tell you anything, the more that protects them on like a bunch of different ways. And remember, we don't just do that, but we don't just do that by snuggling them and responding them as babies. We also do that by when they come to us and they tell us stuff that we don't like, we don't overreact. And I know that's a tough one too, but that's part of it. It provides a foundation for your lifelong connection and attachment relationship. So that trust piece, um, that's what's going to keep bringing your child back for family dinners. That's what's going to put you in your grandchildren's lives someday, if they have some. Um, those are the trust is going to keep bringing you back into their life when they no longer need your financial or emotional support. Um, because it feels good to be around people that we trust. It feels comfortable. It feels safe. And like personally, that's my goal, is that my children feel comfortable, safe around me, that they feel like they're in a place where they can trust the adults, they can trust the people around them. And I've had quite a lack of that in my life. And for me, I think it's just really important that I do that. This approach also shows your child that they deserve to be trusted and have trust in other relationships. So it gives them a framework for trust and what trust is within relationships. Because I think it's a very simple word. It's only 5 letters, but it is a big part of what's going on in a lot of our relationships, especially our personal ones, but even our professional ones as well. It also increases confidence and social skills. This one piece. It's a pretty big part of attachment theory. Also part of this Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. It is not. It's not as true for neurodivergent children. Um, true. True is not the right word. It's not as researched. That's the best way I would say it. In my personal opinion, I think that yes, there is increased confidence and social skills with children who have trust in their caregiver and have secure attachment. Um, I think that those skills need to be measured against other neurodivergent people versus typically developing people. And I think that's where the miss is. And I think also it's hard to define because some neurodivergent people have really strong social skills, or have strong social skills in one area, not in another. Maybe they're confident in one area, not another. The one thing that I've really noticed is a lot of us are confident in the area that when we're talking about something that we really enjoy. And I think that that probably comes a lot from secure attachment and trust in yourself and belief in yourself. It also helps you recognize when people are not being trustworthy and know that that isn't safe. Like you'll recognize someone lying or not being trustworthy or going back on their word or saying they're going to do something and not doing it. You'll notice that your child will see that as an unsafe behavior because in their understanding, a safe, healthy relationship involves being trustworthy, involves being honest when, um, being as honest as one possibly can and within a developmentally appropriate framework. But if they don't have that, it can be harder to recognize that as not healthy or toxic or emotional immaturity when that's how your parents were, obviously. So a few keywords that have come up in this little spot is attachment, responsiveness, reflection, and co-regulation. So as I said before, you will see many words used over because these principles don't work, like they're not silos on their own. They don't work individually, they work together. So attachment is one of the principles, responsiveness is one of the principles, and reflection is one of the principles. So I'm going to save those to be explained when I explain that principle. Co-regulation is not one of the principles, although it's a really big part of what we do. It just doesn't work as a principle, so it's not one of our principles, it's one of our tools. So I am going to explain what that is, just in case you don't understand. So what is co-regulation? So simply, it is sharing your calm with others. next big question always is, how do I do that when I'm not calm? And the good news is you don't need to be calm to co-regulate. You just need to know how to regulate your own nervous system. And my guess is, and people say, well, hold on, I don't think I know how to do that. I'm not sure I know how to do that. My guess is you already have ways that you do this just automatically. And once you start understanding the nervous system works and things that people do intentionally to regulate their nervous system, you start recognizing, oh, I do that already, or oh, that's something I used to do as a child. And I always find those moments really interesting. If you instinctually take a deep breath, like this is one example that I noticed within myself. If you instinctually take a deep breath when you feel overwhelmed, that is your body trying to regulate your nervous system. It's something I do. But babies are not born with this ability, they learn it from us. And what happens if a child does not receive co-regulation during that trust versus mistrust stage? So usually they learn how to suppress their emotions instead because of their need for attachment. So a baby needs to feel attached to a caregiver, whether that's securely or insecurely, in order to get their emotional and physical needs met. So if the caregiver is attuned, if the caregiver is co-regulating, if the caregiver is doing that responsive dance back and forth, then the child is learning to co-regulate. If the parent is not being responsive, they're shutting down, they're only responding to the baby when maybe they don't cry or on a certain schedule maybe, or whatever, then that can sort of give the message to the child, oh, I need to suppress my emotions because my caregiver doesn't like my emotions, and when I show them how I feel, they create distance with me, and I don't get my attachment needs met. And sometimes people, they're, if you're feeding on a schedule and all that very strictly, sleeping on a schedule very strictly, these things can all, when they need the cuddle and you're not giving it to them, that's giving them the message that I can't trust this person to give me my needs. And I know it seems really simple, and we're taught to do that, to like train them not to need you as much, but that is the truth. You're training them to simply not need you as much. They still need you just as much. They just learn how to express their emotions so that they can get that need met. And that's really just not fair to a baby or even a child. So it's not just about making sure your child can trust you. That's that responsiveness, that co-regulation, that back and forth. It's also important that your child knows that you trust them, and also modeling that you trust yourself. So an example of this, I've given an example of showing your child that they can trust you in the responsiveness, but showing that you trust your child. That is normally more of a challenge once we get to toddlerhood and grade school, and especially the teen years. And it's really, really hard. It sounds really simple, but it's really hard. And often reflection can help us with that. Go back to, why don't you trust your child? What are your fears? What are those fears about? Where did they come from? Were you maybe not trusted when you were a child? And so then it comes to the next point of modeling that you trust yourself. And this is where we kind of start to realize that, oh my gosh, I'm missing this big piece of trust. Trust is a big piece for me. Now, if you have trust in place, if you have all three of these things, like, I mean, I don't even know why you would read the next, several principles. You're probably good to go. But most people are not that secure in this, including myself. So these are the things that we're working towards, because it's not just, oh, you can trust me. It's, I want to teach you that you can trust yourself, and I want to teach you that I trust myself as well. So I'm just going to wrap it up with this little point, a little something I was thinking earlier today. In a world where it feels like you can't trust anyone, I think it's even more important that our children feel like they can trust us, their parents.